Many of you have visited AWA before. I've seen many of your faces, many of you I know, but for those of you who this is a first meetup, there may be some of you. Our mission is to make working life better. We've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years, and we pretty much join as many people together with people who have been working in this field in one form or another to learn from each other, to share our ideas, and to take this back into the practical workplace to see if we can remove some of the suffering in our working lives. And this meetup is part of that. And you'll also see on our YouTube channel pretty much over 200 other meetups that we've run that you can also learn from. So do check that out as well. We have 2 courses which I'd like to introduce to you. Some of you have seen these before. Some of you maybe even have been on one of them. We have this is an IC Agile enterprise coaching class. It's a cohort program. We also have the team coaching class, of which David here will be running. And these are 9-month practical programs where you actually do the work in your organization. So you learn on the course, but also you go and you practice in the organization. Just wanted to make you aware of these 2 programs. If you want to learn more, then do check out the AWA website, and I'll drop a link in for that later. And so that's it from me and AWA. That's what we're about. We're about trying to make working life better and to help you to help others create amazing organizations. So tonight, I would like to welcome Myles Downey. So anyone who has been in the professional coaching world will surely have heard of Myles and his work over the last 3 decades of contributing to this industry. And it seems that whenever I'm reading a coaching book, there's a reference or 3 to Myles's work somewhere in there. And he's done so much brilliant work over that time that it's an absolute honor and privilege to have him here. He's an author of at least 3 books, with another one coming out later this year. The book that's coming out, I think, is called The Enabling Manager. And we could all do with more enabling managers. I think that's the name of the book. Myles, you might correct me on that if I've got it right or not. I'd like to introduce Myles as I am, absolutely fantastic to have you. I'll pass over to you, and thank you for being here. I'll just stop the share on my stopping the share now. And passing over to you, Myles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. It's very gracious. I've been, as the way with these things, I prepare over a number of weeks and do an initial sketch of what I'm going to do, and then revisit and revisit and build and build and build. And 2 things have been very much on my mind. One of which is just how pretentious the word craft could seem. And so I've been a little bit, I won't say nervous, but there's been some trepidation around that. But what I'm trying to reflect in that is something that's essential and simple, that can be learned and improved with practice over time. Again, without being silly, I started coaching in my late teens on a tennis court, and learned an awful lot about how to engage with people, listen to people, understand people at a very, very young age. And then was fortunate to meet with some great teachers over the years and hone those skills and bring them to somewhere across decades, where what I notice now is that I'm doing less and less and less and less. And what I am doing is more precise, more I won't say surgical, because that puts the power in the wrong hands, but precise is not a bad word. So that's one thing that I'm going to hope to reflect in what I'm going to take you through. The other is the idea of agile and agility, because when the early conversations with organizations about coaching and the implications of coaching, which are that people will explore their own potential and express themselves more fully and more capably in the workplace. those conversations weren't always the most joyful that you could imagine, because what I discovered quite early on was that most organizations didn't really want their people to express themselves and to explore their potential in work. They just wanted to do their jobs. And of course, in a book that I've been preparing with a friend, which is a book on flow. So flow is that term that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, professor of psychology at Chicago a few years ago, University of Chicago, coined to define a mental state in which we perform to our best, so flow. And we were looking at what enables and what disables flow. And we came upon a term which was the compliant society. And we looked at how so many of our institutions are actually designed to generate compliance. A population that does as it's guided to do, or enforced, or in modern parlance, perhaps nudged. And you from that, in terms of management practice, you get things like, you get to Henry Ford and his how he managed the line. That takes you to total quality. It takes you to business process re-engineering. I just about forgot that because it didn't last all that long. Right through to kind of, then we got to kind of Six Sigma and then lean. And then there's a kind of this massive shift with agility, because it goes to a different place. All the others are about compliance. They're about efficiency. Essentially, they're about efficiency, and therefore they're about compliance. And that squeezes humanity out, inevitably. And when you get your human resource department, who are managing people and helping them develop, apparently, and start deploying similar kinds of practices, you really know you're fucked. I mean, that's the end. And then something shifts, because we've done efficiency to death. We really can't do anything more with efficiency. It's kind of done. So what's next? And what's missing, of course, is the things that make a real difference, that create a paradigm shift or whatever else, and that's the human being. So there is, I like to think, and I could be deluding myself, because I have been for more than 30 years deluding myself, that this might be, I'll put it these ways, we're closer to a horizon in which things may be different, and people may find that work is something that can be joyful and productive, and also be a place where they can learn and develop. So and it's understanding that your world is in agility, that's the space in which my world of coaching and your world of agility join up. So the craft of coaching, my intention is to go through something that hopefully simplifies rather than complicates, because as coaching has increasingly become something approximating a profession, it has become, well, all the people behind in the wonderful institutions that administer and manage coaching, they just talk about standard and ethics all the time, which is kind of slightly scary. But that's what happens. But there is a simplicity in coaching, and you don't have to be a psychologist or an expert in neuropsychology or neuroscience in order to be able to do it. Actually, there are some very fundamental human skills that we all possess. And if we apply them correctly, then things can be transformative. So that's the space I'm going into. I've got about 10 slides. I don't know a better way yet of doing that. You do need the graphics in front of you to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do that awful thing and disappear. If you've got, you'll have kind of heard my voice already, and you'll have noticed that there's a semblance of some structure behind it on a good day, a Thursday, possibly not a Wednesday. That's the only joke I'm doing. But there's a flexibility to what I'm speaking, and I can move with what's coming back at me. So if you have questions or observations, or indeed a new thought, or you put something together in a different way, then either shout it out or send us a chat, and we'll be monitoring that. We will take a pause at a certain point, not sure when exactly, and just allow me to take some water and draw some breath and hear what you, and see if there are any questions, and we'll take it from there. So the more of that, the more we'll learn, and the more we'll enjoy ourselves. So I'm going to put on my glasses so I actually do the next bit correctly, which is to share my screen. And this always takes longer than I ever wish it would. And then I've got to find the right document.
Always happens to me as well.
It's
Always
decided, yeah, it's decided that it didn't, I put up the document too late, so it doesn't want to show it immediately. Let me.
It always happens to me too. Zoom has this funny way of rearranging itself every time you try to share your screen or do anything.
This is far too exciting. There it is. It's now decided that it's here.
Brilliant.
He's standing up to be more assertive.
And I need to now do this. Apparently, technology is anything that was created after you were born, which means that I can just about understand a typewriter. So all those words have already been said. Here's something I rather like. This comes from craftsmanship names an enduring basic human impulse, the desire to do a job well for its own sake. And there's something in that about flow as well, because when one's doing a job well for its own sake, one of Csikszentmihalyi's criteria for conditions for flow was that it would be autotelic, the pleasure of doing the activity. And that was by Richard Sennett in a book called Craftsman. So that was 2009. That was before we woke up. But the craftspersonship just doesn't really trip off the tongue. But that's a kind of an embracing statement for where I'm headed. And I want to take you into a kind of a placeholder, which is about a model that is, I call the effective coaching model because I couldn't find better words at the time. And it's an attempt to simplify. So essentially, in coaching, there are these two entities. They're the people you'll see. We're not talking team coaching here. We're talking between these. I use the word player because sometimes you find people use the word coachee. In fact, you'll most often hear people use the word coachee. And boy, does it piss me off. Because a coachee is somebody who has something done to them. They have coaching done to them, God forbid. And it suggests a passiveness. It's like, divorcee is somebody who has been divorced. They weren't active in the proceedings. So I bring the word player in there for a number of reasons. One, its suffix is er. They're active. They do something. In fact, in a coaching relationship, they're the primary party, and the player is to just kind of to tickle and provoke a bit, which is also to suggest that agility, play, enjoyment, all of those notions. So those are the two primary entities. Except we tend to forget that coaching takes place in a context. So lots of coaches these days come from or aspire to come from a therapeutic or a psychological background, or are moved in that direction by by what interests them. That's fantastic, but it's really important that we take care of the context in which it's taking place. If I think of the coaching engagements that have not worked so well for me, very often it's that I haven't really understood the context in which the player was operating. So. And the context for me includes the industry, the what's happening in the world at that time, the market forces, but then getting more specific to the nature of the company, the mission, the vision, the values, the people surrounding that person. So it's a rich, and what it says is that it's not good enough just to be a coach, no matter how skilled you are in those primary coaching skills. You also have to be able to inquire of the context, and that makes a massive difference. So those are three entities. Here's a fourth, the relationship between the two, because as things progress, that relationship grows stronger and is a thing that needs to be accounted for. It needs to be accounted for in the most simplistic sense in terms of kind of the contracting that you do, which can be anything from as simple as, would you like me to coach you? Or would you coach me, please? To something much more complex that takes place over time. And then there are the dynamics that begin to occur within any relationship between two people. And this came about because we were really struggling to find ways of this. I'm going to say some more about these words. There's a distinction in the world of coaching between directive and non-directive coaching. I'll just leave you those words as they are for the moment. And they're wholly unsatisfying. They don't describe very much at all to most people unless you write a book about it. for them, and that's not good enough. So what this became, we were thinking about, in coaching, there's what's happening over here in the coach, and there's the resources, the experience, the imagination, intelligence, whatever that exists within the coach. Those are resources that are available. And then more importantly, there's over there. There's what's happening in that other person. There's the resources available in that other person. There's their imagination, their intelligence, their creativity, all of those good things, their capacity to solve problems. So there's over here, over there, between us and around us. They're just slightly more familiar terms to describe what's going to happen. So what I'm suggesting here is that in this sense, coaching is simple. There are 4 things you've got to attend to make sure that it works. And each of those 4 things has a set of skills that relates to them, so that you can exploit them for the benefit of the player. 2 things to say here. One of which is, in this conversation, I'm going to focus mostly on what it takes to help the player use their own resources. That's the source of them standing in their own shoes, their own authority, their self-efficacy. It's also the source of agility, as I was saying earlier. And I'll say a little bit, but not as much, about what happens in the coach, because clearly that's germane, and that's the point, your point of access. And then my kind of, in taking this forward, one of the sources that caused me to get involved in coaching was a book I read called The Inner Game of Tennis. I was a good tennis player, well, relatively good. I'm Irish, so now you know what relative means. There was no coaching when I was growing up. And a guy called Tim Galway, who has become a great friend, wrote The Inner Game of Tennis, and he had this idea, which was expressed this. So here's a few words. This is clearly not the truth, so Tim never told that lie. Performance is not equal to potential. What makes it interesting and useful is that he added this word in. And what we're talking about there is interference, is fear, it's self-doubt. I'm not good enough. I'm not up to that. I'm not worthy. It's uncertainty. It's not knowing the way forward. What should I do? Uncertainty can become kind of second guessing. Particularly if you're working to somebody else, a manager, and you're uncertain. You say, well, what do they want me to do? And then you're truly losing it completely. So first of all, if the simple kind of axiomatic truth in this, I think, is interesting, because what it says is, if you reduce the interference, more of your potential becomes available, and you perform to a higher level. So the fundamental notion here is that is reduce the interference. The coach's first job is to remove or reduce that interference, so that the person they're coaching, the player, has more of their resources available to them. So so that's kind of the starting point. But as a starting point, it kind of sets your strategy for how you go about your coaching. And without getting into the strange technical words, if you recall that time in your life, for some of you maybe still, where you read comics and comic books, there were 2 particular pieces of code you need to understood. One piece of code was that the speech bubble that comes from somebody's mouth, in which you can read what they're saying. And the second was the thought bubble. And the idea of the thought bubble is that it's above somebody's head. So here are 2 little sketches. And in kind of more traditional models of coaching, the coach knows. And their job is to disseminate their wonderful knowledge to you, the poor player. So you see here, it may not be clear enough on your screen, on the left-hand side, there's the coach sitting upright, and the words, I know. So they've got the answers, and the job is to impart them. And then actually the shift that we're trying to create is we're trying to move the thought bubble over to the player's head. And a great friend of mine, in the early days of learning to do this stuff, an ex-McKinsey consultant, her mantra was, over whose head is the thought bubble? And that was the question that she constantly asked herself. Over whose head is, and if it was over her head, if she was working too hard, then she wasn't helping the player move forward necessarily. I need to be a bit more explicit about that. So I'm going to talk to you about some coaching approaches, but not in grand terms of models and disciplines and psychologies and philosophies, but just in the everyday practicality of speaking to somebody. There are these 4 levels that you can discern, and at the top I've got knowing, and that's what we would call a directive. So I know, you don't, but I'm using the word knowing because I wanted to get beyond knowledge, because when I'm coaching, my knowing comes from experience, what I've learned, my knowledge, but also comes from my intuition. In that moment, sometimes I just know something that about that person and their circumstances that's useful. I put it together in a unique way that can be useful to them. And when I give that to that other person, that's a directive act. And that can be an incredibly useful thing to do. Level 3 is about process. So for instance, one of the things that I'm finding very useful to do with people I'm working with at the moment is helping them understand what their direction of travel is. If they're in a large consulting firm, it may be to make partner or to retire gracefully. So sometimes it's very simple. But I'm working with a woman in a European city who's just set up her own equity and trading firm, and the direction of travel for her is much more complex. It involves her personal life and what she wants for herself in terms of wealth and where she lives and experience down the road. It's the values of the firm that she's building. It's the vision of whom she wants to play to. It's how they use technology. So I've got a way of asking questions around direction of travel, that embraces ideas like. So it's an established process. There's a sequence of questions I ask. That's what I mean by process. Structure is more simple. Somebody says, last year was the worst year of my life. If I'm a coach, I might say, how do you want this year to be? And they'll say whatever they say. And how do you want next year to be? And the structure I've used there is one in time, temporal, past, present, future, right, wrong. These are structures. There are more complex structures that are models that people know and have. You'll have some around agility that are useful to people. Right down at the bottom of my list, and this is 80%, this is where you spend 80% of your time. It's called following interest, and I'll be very explicit about what that is in a minute. But am I going to do this right now? Yes, here's the thing. There's these words, directive and non-directive. People hear the word directive and they think of it as if it means something instructive. They're kind of, I instruct somebody, or they think of it as somebody, maybe as a police person directing the traffic. The police person has the control. They direct, so it's associated with authority figures. And I remember asking somebody once when they came up with these words, well, hold on, who or what is being directed? And it was in that moment that there was a flash of insight that it isn't about a person directing another person or instructing another person. It's about attention. So in the conversation between me and the person I'm coaching, who gets to direct where attention goes? Who gets to direct what the player thinks about? And if your answer is the coach, and that's what would be the normal response, what you're building in there is dependency. We're back into our compliant world, not into our agile world, where the individual is expressing themselves and living for themselves. So what the game is to get the thought bubble over the other person's head. It's to get them putting their attention where they need to put it. That's what makes the difference. So a very simple way of doing that emerged some years ago, many years ago. And at the time, I didn't see it. I didn't understand what was happening. Because some of my roots are in the inner game and tennis, a lot of what I learned was about applying these principles on the tennis court. I've since applied them in other sports as well, which has been great fun. And it's been amazing to see just how applicable they are, even into disciplines that I know nothing about. But I was watching one of my colleagues give a tennis lesson to somebody who wasn't a great tennis player, but it was a demonstration of the coaching technique. That's why Caroline, her name was there. And she asked the person what they wanted to learn. They wanted to improve their backhand. And then Caroline said something which to most people would be really strange. She said, I'm going to throw you some balls, hit them as best you can, doesn't matter where they go. So she's removing interference. Hit them as best you can, doesn't matter where they go. So the person's not tense, they're relaxing. And what I want you to do is to tell me anything you notice about what you're doing. Now that's a really strange instruction for most people. So it took our friend who was having the lesson a few minutes to get what Caroline meant. And after a while they said, well, I feel really clumsy. Oh, okay. And Caroline threw a few more balls and said, tell me what else you notice. And they said, well, I've got some pain in my elbow. Okay, great. And then more balls, what else do you notice? My feet are very heavy. Yeah, okay. So Caroline heard 3 or 4 things, and then she said, so what I've heard you say is you feel clumsy, your elbow hurts, and your feet are heavy and also clumsy. So I'm going to throw you some more balls, and what I want you to do is to tell me, of all of those things, which is most interesting? Caroline threw the balls, our friend hits the ball a few times, a few more times. What's most interesting? My elbow, the pain in my elbow. And then Caroline comes in with, hit some more balls and tell me about the pain in your elbow. So what she was doing is following a principle which is called following interest. And my computer has decided that it isn't going to move forward at this point. Oh, okay, so the question that goes with that's because it's something. So the question that Caroline used were, what else? Tell me more. That's the expand piece of my following interest model. That goes first. And then the vertical is, what's most interesting, what stands out? And it's that process that puts the thought bubble over the player's head. They're now owning it. So when I'm coaching, I may say something about what do we need to speak about right now in this conversation, and they may say, well, I'm struggling with my relationship with my boss, but the main project, whatever it's called, is a bit stuck too. So okay, so which of those is most interesting? Oh, I was going to talk about my boss, but actually, what's really most interesting is to attend to the project. Okay, so tell me some more about that. And they'll tell me 2 or 3 things. That we're slightly missing our deadlines. The collaboration with our colleagues and the client isn't going as well as it should be. Whatever it is, and then I'll say, oh, okay. So which of those 3 things you've just mentioned, which stands out the most? And what that does is it puts the attention over the person is directing the conversation, not me, and that's the place I want to be. There are 2 things to take slightly more further in this. Many years ago, I was flying into Austin, Texas, for a consulting engagement, and we're coming into land. We're still a bit out, and we're at whatever height we were, a few thousand feet, and I had been in a kind of semi-reverie, kind of just waking up after a long journey, and I was oddly thinking about how we think and looking out the window, and I see below me the Colorado River, and what I notice is these large swoops and curves and whatever else that it's I know where it's going. It's going out through Austin and into the Gulf of Mexico, but boy, is it taking a long time to do it. It's going left and right and all over the place. And I thought, as an engineer, what would you do? Well, you'd build a goddamn canal, and that would save a lot of time and energy. And the next thought that came to my mind was, hold on. The point of the canal is that you create a straight line and save time. But from a different perspective, there is a straight line here. If I was at ground level and could view the river from far enough away, I'd notice that there was pretty much a straight line, and it was going from high to low. And it's like, and not only that, but the river's kind of it's following the path of least resistance. It's not going through rocks. It's not going uphill. It kind of knows what it's doing. And then something clicked. What if thinking had its own internal logic? What if thinking unfolded? So I think we sometimes think of thinking as a semi-mathematical, logical thing. It's much more plastic and strange than that. But if it did have its own logic, that would be kind of internal logic and knew where it was going. If thinking did unfold, that would be really interesting. And then I remembered a very dear friend of mine who suffers from depression. And every now and again, it would get to a point where they needed to do something about it. Medical interventions weren't great. The talking therapy seemed to help, but they seemed to help for the first 2 or 3 sessions. And I noticed that pattern. And the assumption I unfairly made was, as soon as this begins to get difficult, my friend opts out. So she's kind of in denial. And then I thought again, I said, no, see, this is my hypothesis. What's happening is in the first few sessions, the therapist or psychologist doesn't know anything about my friend. So they have to listen. And and in their listening, my friend is speaking. Her thinking is unfolding. Gets to session 3 or 4, and the therapist decides they know what's wrong. They build the canal. The thinking stops. So the importance of following interest is that it allows that to happen, that unfolding. And there's maybe an even simpler way of thinking of it than the slightly complicated way I've presented it here with the Model T, which is floodlight, spotlight. So what floodlight says is, and this is often how I'd start a session with a colleague. I first learned it working with a managing partner in a McKinsey office who would come into our sessions unbelievably stressed with all this. No, he was well used to handling it, but there was just a lot going on. So to kind of get him focused, to remove that interference, I'd say, so tell me what's happening. And that was a floodlight question. So of all the things that were of interest to him at that time, we would turn on the floodlight and we would light every part of the pitch, the playing pitch. And he'd tell me what was happening. And once he was getting to the end of what was happening, then it was spotlight. So of all those things, what's most interesting to talk about? Click, spotlight, that, okay. And a complete transformation. So the interference was gone. He's now focused. He's got access to all his resources. Game on, we can have a good coaching session. I'm just going to, one eye to the clock. Simon, I'm just going to draw breath for a second, not least because I need it, and just see if there's anything I've said that we might want to take up, or if there are any questions that might be useful to.
So we have a question in the chat. If anybody else would like to put questions in the chat, and then I can also ask if you want to speak out as well. So the first question that was in the chat was from Anil. Anil, are you still here? Do you want to read out your question, or would you like me to do it? If I don't hear from you in the next 3 seconds, then I shall do it.
I'll be honest, Simon, I've forgotten what my question was because I was so absorbed in what Myles was saying recently. If you have it in front of you, please feel free to.
Yes, I do. So thank you, Neil, for writing the question. So Neil's asking, you talked about context and the coach and the player being in a context. And the question was, does the coach require experience of the context or just a way of being able to frame the problem?
It's a really good question, and unfortunately, the answer is both. So I noticed that there are industries I've spent a lot of time working in. I've kind of specialized in professional services, not entirely by choice. Those were the clients that came along to me. So I kind of know how professional service firms work, and that can be very helpful in my understanding the dynamics and what happens, and particularly around the politics. But equally, there are none are going to come to mind. I know this as I speak, but there are models that will help you consult to an organization. Structures that will allow you to ask the right questions and make sure all the bases are covered. I know that because I did a course about 25 years ago, but there was a very good core model, but my brain won't pick it up now. So it's kind of both. The danger, of course, with any knowledge is that it blinds you to the new, and to the and the different. So that's the to be able to come to this occasionally also with beginner's mind is useful, but not always easy.
Thank you, Myles. We have another question from Stephen. Stephen, are you here? Would you like to read your question out?
Yeah, hi. You mentioned that you were a tennis coach. Do you find it easier to coach sports you don't know because of the interference? Is that so? The less you know about the subject, the easier it is. Yeah,
it's and this is you'll have noticed that the word intent was written in one or two of the bits of blurb about this program, and something that I'm going to talk about next. It's almost the most difficult thing because the framing piece about this is, to what degree is this about the person learning, and to what degree is this about the person performing, and what's the time frame on that? So if there's a long time frame, you can invest more in the learning and development. If there's a shorter time frame, you might need to take some shortcuts. So I'm training somebody to write some very difficult material content for a mobile learning platform. And the balance is about giving them enough time to try writing, and giving them the feedback and giving them enough time, time to have a go, before I come in and say, okay, my friend, that was really brilliant, but we need to move it on to the next phase. So we need to just repitch it this way, and come in with my experience and be quite directive and say, this is the way it's going to be. And it's like, so it's framed within those two things, which is easier. The most difficult thing is to get the balance right. I actually prefer working in places where I don't have a huge amount of knowledge, because I find that the freshness that I bring to that tends to bring more learning. And frankly, it's more fun. If I don't know, thank you for your question. If I don't know, I pay more attention. The danger in knowing is that your attention, it's all over here. Your attention is in your own head, and you're so smug and clever, and you've stopped listening. So I now know why I prefer it when I don't know. Because I have to attend better. And I know that when I attend better, my interference goes away and I do better coaching. If that last bit made sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Brilliant question. Simon, I'm going to keep this moving on because I want to get into the next piece, if I may.
Absolutely, thank you.
And I now have to find out how to share my screen again. I'm going to assume it was the same as last time, which is one of the disappointing things about life. And here we go. It's that one, and it's this one. So I'm kind of taking from the last comment, and I'm going to take you somewhere. No, I have to do this other thing first. Just go into presenter view. This is one of the problems with Zoom, is it doesn't happen very quickly in that transition. So we've spoken about that. Oh, it's going backwards now. No, I'm going backwards. Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. A wonderful approach to psychotherapy, Assagioli, grew up. Assagioli was a contemporary of Freud's. Freud, in fact, hoped that Assagioli would bring Freudian analysis into Italy, but Assagioli was too great a human being to be hoodwinked, and had a much more holistic, humanistic approach to psychology. And some of his work is truly magnificent. And here's one of his ideas, and because it's completely relevant. And what I'm trying to do in this is to give you a perspective, which the question that came in last, and I tried to answer it, and I think this is going to be a better answer. So it's about a perspective on that. He talked about two fundamental human drives, love and will. And he presented them initially, or they almost accidentally get presented as a duality, as a polarity. And that's that's kind of all well and good for our initial understanding. So the first one is will. And will he described as a masculine energy. That doesn't mean that it's the sole preserve of men. Women can display will as well. But he described it as a masculine energy. And it's kind of it's very much about control. So when I mentioned the compliant society, that's a patriarchy mostly. And it demonstrates this. So it's kind of my way or the highway. It's about control. It's about structure. You see, if I have structure in place, people will comply. And it's like but it's not that simple. There are clearly two sides to will. There's, you know, I'm blessed with a stepdaughter who's, you know, well in her mid-30s now, but I met her when she was 4. And at first of all, I didn't really know what my rights were as a stepfather. And as a consequence, we weren't putting enough structure around Victoria, which didn't help her. And it was only when my psychotherapist at the time said, Myles, not only do you have a right, you have a responsibility, that the penny clicked. So I started gently putting in place agreements about how we'd operate. That's an appropriate, well, I like to think it was appropriate. I'll check and let you know. That's an appropriate form of will. There's an inappropriate form of will, which is when it becomes bullying, becomes too willful. And equally then love, feminine energy. It's about, whereas will is about control, trust, love is about trust. It's about, when rather than structure, it's about process. It's about letting things happen, letting things emerge. Again, there can be the positive side of that is obvious, that the nurturing of another human being, obvious. There's the over nurturing, which is less obvious but equally dangerous. So if you stood outside a school, which we can just about do again, and you listened to some of the parents, and a child comes out upset and in tears, and it's kind of, oh, poor little Johnny. You go, no, don't worry, I'll speak to the teacher and I'll make it better. Whoa, hold on a minute. You've just robbed that child of an opportunity to learn and take responsibility. So overly nurturing can be almost as bad as bullying, because both of them deprive the object of an opportunity to take responsibility. So there's love and will. So as Einstein memorably said, a problem can never be resolved at the level of consciousness at which it was created. And Assagioli knew that. And therefore you transcend, go up a level, you transcend and include. So you embrace love and will. And this is about presence and wisdom. So it's about that moment where you as a consultant, a coach, a teacher, a parent, just pause for a second and say, hold on a minute, what's in the best interest of the player, the client, the child? And it's about, and sometimes it will be a nurturing response, and sometimes it will be a more willful response. Sometimes it'll be about imposing some conditions and some constraints, and sometimes it will be about trusting things to happen. So, but the problem here is that we're kind of, as a function of our education and the way in which we have been nurtured, we will have a disposition towards one or the other of those. And I have a disposition towards the love side, and it makes me a pain in the arse, because I don't often say what I want, and I don't often enough I'm a crap manager of people. Because I don't help them by giving them enough direction. So what's behind this is a question of intent. So when I'm working with somebody, I've got an intent, and whether I know it or not, it's there. And one of my jobs is to surface that intent. So overall, as a coach, clarity about my intent is vital, and knowing that there are two things I'm there to do, and there's a conflict between those two things, one of which is that I'm working as a coach consultant to a client who wants me to help their people achieve results. So there's a business result. And the world of coaching has become overly feminized, and it's too much about learning and development. And we need to have the presence and wisdom to bring that back into balance. So it's about results, but it's also about helping that person stand in their own two shoes, giving them that agility. And in the moment of coaching and the way I construct my engagements, that's part of what I'm doing. But there's another thing that happens, which is that anytime I ask a question, it's useful to know what my intent is. When I'm doing less teaching of coaches these days than I used to, but I'd frequently see somebody who was practicing coaching and I'd see them be stuck, or I'd see them ask a question that didn't work. And I'd say, hold on a minute, what was your intent? And very often, if they told the truth, the intent was, well, to rescue the person, or to show them the right way of doing it, or, well, you know, I've been a manager for 40 years, and this is the way in which it should be done. It's like, oh, okay, and did that help? So surfacing intent is really useful, and if you have clarity of intent, then the action tends to follow. There's a famous maxim in architecture, which comes from a guy called Louis Sullivan, an architect practicing in Chicago at the turn of the previous century, so 1850s to 1920 something from memory. And he coined the phrase, form ever follows function, which we mostly hear now as form follows function. And it's really interesting. What he was arguing for was that once you understood the purpose, the function, the intent, then there needs to be a congruence with what happens next. And what I'm suggesting is that once you have clarity about what you're trying to do as a coach, clarity about your intent, you worry less about what the next question is, because it's kind of obvious. And it's that sense of intent is back to my first slide and Galway's notion of performance is equal to potential minus interference. When you have, one of the biggest things that gets in the way of people when they're coaching is not resolving this notion of intent and understanding what it is they're trying to achieve. And that becomes kind of almost the most critical thing. That if you get that right, you start really taking care of people. And
Myles,
yeah.
Sorry to stop you. I was just wondering, I'm just thinking about that a little bit and the kind of coaching intent. How does that fit into kind of leading questions and stuff like that? Am I misunderstanding it a little bit?
I don't know if you're misunderstanding it, but I hear the question. So some parts of coaching has gotten misconstrued as, yes, listening, of course, but now listening has just been dismissed. And it's about asking questions. I'm not sure it is about asking questions, and a leading question can be very disruptive in that it generates interference for the person being coached. In other words, if I intend giving somebody some information, I'm not going to ask a question about it. I'm going to tell them. Because they don't have to, if I ask a leading question, they'll say, why is this nice person who's been taking care of me now pushing me down this road? I might not want to go there. So when I want to switch from being in a following interest, non-directive mode, I signal it clearly because I don't want to generate interference. So I'll say, can we just stop for a second? I'm going to switch mode. I've been listening intently, but I now have an idea, and I think it's useful. I'm overstating this by a million times. Can I tell you what my idea is? And then I tell them straight. Now, but my intention there is to make sure that they stay that I don't generate interference for the person. That's the primary thing. So if I've got a leading question, I find out what it is and I tell the person what I think they need to know, and I position it so that they can reject it. So they've come up with two options for how they progress. I've got a third one. I've got a third option. Can I tell you it? Yes. And then I'll summarize. I'll say, well, yours was option 1. Then you had option 2, and then I suggested option 3, which is most interesting, and I move immediately back into the non-directive space. So Do I ask leading questions? Yes, occasionally, but I never ask more than 2 in a row. So if they don't get it the first time, then I'll change. Then I'll be direct and explicit and transparent.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'm kind of half looking at the clock, and I'm realizing that the thing that I most want to tell you about is something slightly. There's a whole other thing in coaching which is slightly misunderstood, which is the notion of relationship. So anybody will tell you that, you know, most people and most courses you attend on coaching will say, well, the relationship is vital. Anybody worth their salt can create a good coaching relationship within minutes. If they can't, go and do something else. So it's not really about the relationship in that simplistic sense. It's about something much more. There's a capacity we have, I understand, and it's called resonance. And resonance, I don't know if you can see my fingers in the screen, but resonance is if you have one object and it's oscillating at a certain frequency, and you put another object of the same size, shape, density beside it, they'll start moving together. It took me 10 years to get that right. That's resonance. It's the capacity of one object to influence another. Human beings have a capacity called resonance. It's very little of, or no, not very little, many things we think as being inbuilt in the human from birth are actually learned very quickly through parent and a lot through the mother, through resonance. That profound connection that then allows people to things like learning about digesting food, defecation. All of these things are learned through resonance. And here's the thing: it doesn't go away when you cease being a child or when you cease being a mother or a father. It's with you all the time. So that idea of resonance is always and ever present. And it's one of the things that if you're silent and attentive to the person, that gives your intuition kind of the right and the space in which to roam. It gives you that profound understanding. But you can't, to get there, you've got to change your mental state. And this has kind of been what's underneath everything I've been saying, is that I've mentioned Csikszentmihalyi's flow. My friend Tim Galway talked about self-1 and self-2. Self-1 is no flow. It's fear and doubt, and a lot of interference. And self-2, on the other hand, is the person in flow, expressing themselves without fear and doubt, focused, attentive. So when I'm coaching, I know that my first job is to be as fully in self-2 as I can possibly be. And my second job is to get the person that I'm working with into self-2, into flow at the same time. And I've described the floodlight and spotlight way of doing that. And what's behind that is, my slides give up on me when they haven't been attended to for long enough. There's a kind of a continuum of attention. And what it says is, left-hand side of the page, that you're kind of aware of stuff, but you're not conscious. It's in the peripheral vision, for instance. And as you begin to wake up and pay attention, you start noticing things. And if somebody says to you, "What are you noticing?" then you might focus your attention on a number of things, and then you might actually remove it from them, the intention being on a number of things, onto being on one thing. So floodlight to spotlight. And what happens in that process is that you get more, and that your sense of flow deepens. And that's the primary driver of great coaching, is the two people entering into that state of flow. And just to take that one step further, our friend Chick said, this is Daniel Coleman, who you'll know from Emotional Intelligence. So really great book, Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. You don't see it mentioned very often, but it's really, really powerful if you're interested in these kinds of things. Flow is a state of self-forgetfulness, the opposite of rumination and worry. People in flow exhibit a masterful control of what they are doing. people perform at their best in flow. So that's, you know, we know that of people in sports. We're less cognizant of that of people in the world of work. You may have noticed the reports that came through when people started working from home, that people were finding that many people, at least those who weren't trying to educate their children at the same time, found that they were performing more effectively because there were fewer distractions. And then my point here is that actually to be in flow when you're coaching is about bringing all of your attention onto the person in front of you, really listening, really understanding. And as you do that, your capacity to explore and develop your craft emerges. And that's where coaching and agility come together again. So I feel I slightly lost my way, so I hope there was a strong thread, a strong enough thread for you through that, and that we hit some spots for you. And if there are any questions that you'd like to ask, I'd be delighted to do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Myles. Certainly felt like a very strong thread to me. Let's have a look. We've got some questions in the chat, and I'll just have a quick look through and see where the first ones were that we started in our new section. So feel free, anyone, to chip in with a question while I'm just having a look through.
So hi Myles, that was really good. I really enjoyed that. But when you're talking about the relationships and creating the scenario where people can really kind of get into flow, right? That ability for them to be able to trust you, you're building rapport. You know, we talk about context, right? And as a coach, we want them to come up with the answers. We want them to, it's more powerful for them rather than us doing the tell. But is the context a little bit about helping to build that initial set of rapport? So, you know, quite often we'll look at our niche. Our niche for coaches is agile, right? But you look at, you've got sports coaching, you've got relationship coaching. In essence, there's an element that's the same across all of them if you're doing coaching. But that first word gets you the foot in the door. I want an agile coach, therefore I'm going to go and search for agile, if I want a relationship. So in your experience, is that context really about that opening the doors, as opposed to it then becoming something that you then start to dictate and direct towards people and telling them how to solve stuff?
I think I also, in doing my best to answer your question, is to be really clear that that it's not so much about how you do it, whether you're directive or non-directive. It's about the results you're trying to create. So I may tell somebody something or point something out or make a suggestion because I know it's going to help them be more in control or take the next step or have to have the courage to do something they wouldn't have done, or simply that they haven't seen something. So I really want to be clear at one level that I'm not saying that there's anything wrong in judiciously instructing, telling, whatever word we want to use. It's incredibly valuable. Like somebody the other day was talking to me about their business and a strategy, and we know what their direction of travel is. And they were saying, well, and it's a person, again, setting up a new business, and that their brother is a specialist in the field and wants to come and play. And I know about the relationship already. And I'm going, no, I'm no. Because you see, we'd established what the direction of travel was, and it was, you know, she wants to run a business independently, and she was losing sight of what the important bit is. So I wasn't going to sit there and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and what do you think the consequences might be? I wasn't going to go down that path. I was going to say, "For God's sake, did you hear what you said?" So it's like I'm really not saying that you can't do that thing. So your wisdom and experience, the overhear bit of my initial model, is vital and valuable. And love and will and presence, that triangle, your job is to be discerning about how and when you use it, and which strategy you're going to adopt next. And that's why I went into intent in such detail, because if you can kind of close your eyes and check out in the middle of the exercise and I'll say, hold on, what's my intent here? And get clarity, then you'll know what to do. But I think that for you, where you're, I don't know this, but my sense is that, and having worked with strategic management consultancy, I know that people are buying those strategic management consultants for their expertise and wisdom and insight. So it's about getting the balance right between those things and making sure there isn't dependency. So I'm saying use it to open the door, use it to build credibility, use it when they're about to fuck up. But the more you can get them, I did some work many years ago with a consulting outfit, J&J Associates, who specialize in safety. And there are all kinds of rules and ways of doing that correctly, and the consequences are huge if you don't. But the more we could get, particularly kind of people at a more operational level, the more we could get at them thinking it through for themselves, the better. I was on Fab 14, which was an Intel factory in Ireland, walking the site with the site coordinator who'd been the safety coordinator, who'd been trained to coach. And he'd had a reputation of being an absolute bully. And we're walking down a corridor, so this place is still being built. And he looks up and he's from Dublin, right? He says, hey, painter, hey, painter, wouldn't it be better if you did something? And he just completely changed his language. He made it, rather than get cross with him, he made a suggestion. And the painter looked around and said, yeah, great idea. and a completely different relationship. So he used his knowledge, but it was his clarity of intent. He didn't want the guy to get hurt. He wasn't just imposing his rules. So it was, yeah, there's a, enough said.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Myles. Geeta's got a fantastic question as well. Would you like to read your question out, Geeta, or would you like me to read it for you?
Either is okay. Since I've started speaking, I'm happy to ask that. Myles, thank you for this, by the way, and to you, Simon. My question is, what is, just curiosity, what is your intent usually when you coach someone? And is this intent usually the same, do you find, when you coach all your players, as you say?
There's something that's happened in the last maybe 5 years. I've always been really clear that that coaching for me is about helping people inhabit their own authority. And actually the root of the word authority goes back to a word in Latin, which is octum, which means to create or produce, which is really interesting. It's almost a counterpoint. And my brother's a Latin scholar. He pointed it out to me. He said, authority and author are the same word, same root. An author creates and produces of themselves. So what motivates me and excites me is to have people who are standing in their own authority, who are learning to express themselves in the world, and achieving the results that brings and the joy that brings. So what's happening is more and more I'm attracting those people into me. So if somebody says to me, if I'm thinking a potential coaching client is there, and what they want to do is take the next step in their firm, I'd probably say there are better people to work with. But if somebody says, even in a very large, very famous consulting practice, strategic consulting practice, quite recently, the guy said, he said, I'm a committed Christian. And I said, yeah, you said something like, what's that about? And he said, well, I said, what I'm interested in doing is showing the light of Christianity in the world. And I said, you mean in your clients? Because I was going, uh-oh. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, hold on, what does that look like? And he went into this visionary flight of people being self-expressed and people, taking responsibility. And I'm going, oh my God, I want to coach this guy. So it's like that. So so with me, what I said about a world that's we've got baked in compliance, and you even see that in some of the nonsense that's happening in the UK and the conversation around Harry and Meghan. in the opposing sides that are around that. Nobody taking a middle ground, everybody taking positions. It's fascinating. But part of what's going on behind that is the breakdown of the patriarchy. It's the breakdown of a compliant society in which we are all complicit. So what increasingly motivates and excites me is that, and it's not. I would like to think that that's not just about because it drives me. It's because every experience I've had is that when I do that, that person is more successful, produces more for their firm, their business, and for themselves.
Okay.
But I never lose sight of what's the primary business objective here.
Okay. So basically your intent is to help them be themselves. If someone wants to be themselves in whatever aspect that might mean. Incidentally, when you say author and authority, for me, they were still congruent because as I hear your definition, I never connected the two. Authority is my sole right to author this piece.
Thank you.
So that sounds still.
Yes, that's brilliant. That is, I would use a profanity as a proper Irishman should, but I won't. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. We've got time for one or two more. I have got a couple of people, or a few people who have messaged me privately asking, will the video be available? So I'll just answer that one quickly. We do have a YouTube channel, as I mentioned before. It's YouTube/Adventures with Agile. It'll probably take a couple of days for the video to be there, but that's where you can find the video afterwards if you want to look back and look at the concepts and go over it again, or share it with other people. Look at the YouTube channel. So I'll just do that one now because there's quite a few people messaging me on that one. We do have a couple more questions.
Also, Miles, slides, we can make them available if that helps.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Okay, we can do that too. We can put a link where they are on the YouTube channel or something like that, and we can host them if that's an issue. We'll figure out how to do that. Thank you, Myles, for that. We have the next question is from Ketil. Apology if I haven't got your name exactly pronounced right. Would you like to read out your question?
Okay, I'll give it a go. We're usually helping teams and probably more as a unit than a group of individuals. I feel most of what you are saying, Myles, is still applicable. But what, if anything, would you change if you were to talk about coaching a team as a unit?
The primary importance of helping them be more unified, to use your word. So and that most often comes down to helping them understand what their collective purpose is. So why are they there and what are they to do? And the sense of that purpose that people are unequivocally signed up to. That's where the most exciting stuff happens. We got many years ago. I worked with a Assagioli's discipline was psychosynthesis, bringing together. And we did an exercise with a team that launched the first internet bank in the UK, Egg. So we worked with that team as they envisaged and built and launched that bank. And the exercise was Judith, my colleague, got each person to come up with an image for themselves that they then had to make real with bits of sticky tape and card and all kinds of nonsense. And then they had to come together as a team and bring all their images together and create one image. And it was incredibly powerful. I mean, I kind of shun away from that stuff sometimes in business because it can look a little bit too touchy-feely. But with these guys at the stage in our relationship, it was really the right thing to do. And out of that sense of fellow feeling amongst that group of people, some new clarity emerged that allowed them to be really clear about the purpose of this team. And it was all embracing, delivering something that unique in the world of business, taking care of each other, giving each other opportunity, all kinds of things. Agility, in a word, was what they got to. It was remarkable. So, and with that, and it was that allowed us to accelerate the pace. So I agree with you. Everything I said is applicable to teams. What you got to do is you got to do that piece of team building that allows that to be an entity that's capable of being coached. And sometimes just very active coaching them, of helping them problem solve together or create a vision together, or helping facilitating their goals. Sometimes that's enough to bring them together. So the coaching can be the team building, if I can put it that way.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Myles. I can't see any more other questions in the channel. Would anybody else like to speak up and ask a question for Myles before the end of our session?
The wine is.
Exactly.
I have one question, Simon, if you allow me. It's more.
Please.
Thank you very much. It's more on the side of ethics, and might not be related to Myles' talk. So, what are your thoughts on situations where the coach is coaching a team, several teams, but also the executive management that is managing those teams, and he sees himself being pushed by the executive management to coach a team in a certain direction, which he thinks is very bad for the individuals in that team. Maybe the team will generate some output that is for some time good for the organization, but that would definitely lead to negative aspects for individuals.
I know.
It
happened, and boy, does it happen. I once had to challenge a chief executive of a prestigious financial organization in the city because he wanted me to do just that. And I said, it's not right. It's not right for them, and it's not right for the business. And he looked at me and said, well, he said, I've got a different better. He said, and I'm the client, he said. So I kind of, okay. I said, well, I said, you're not. He said, what? I said, no, the organization is the client. I'm here to do the best for the organization. And the underlying story there was that this guy was a bully, and he was unwilling to let go of control. So it proved to be a less than happy hunting ground for me, and I kind of had to exit the picture. So again, it's one of those things. It's love and will. Do I go along with it and help people there make the best of it? Because I could have created a story which might have been true that said it's better that I work with this team and try and navigate around this situation, and have that kind of slight compromise be the best for everybody, rather than just ditch them. But the relationship between me and the CEO at this point was so fractured that I wasn't going to be able to help them. So I withdrew. But it is the most difficult thing. And what I will always try and do, and it's not always possible, is I will always try and have somebody represent the organization. So the HR director, in my case, would be the person. So even if I've been taken on by the CEO, I'll make a separate agreement explicitly and transparently with the HR director, which gives me a safe place to stand. And so I don't get caught as the go-between between the CEO or the senior person and his finance director or a particular team. And that way we can triangulate and do what's best for the organization.
Mm-hmm. So in some cases, having a kind of contingency scenario plan in the contracting for the coaching could be useful. It could be one useful.
Precisely. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's probably pretty much what we've got time for this evening. So I wanted to thank you again, Myles, for this absolutely fantastic presentation, hugely deep insights. I've been writing down notes busily myself with loads of thoughts and connections and things from my own practice, and I'm sure that many others have as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your incredible wisdom and for such generosity in your spirit, both here and I can tell in life. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So thank you everybody else for attending as well. Thank you for spending your time with us, and for the also generosity in questions as well, and for participating and listening. I hope that tonight has been useful for you all, and that it makes a difference, and we can all go forth and help others to make this a better planet and a better place of work. Thank you all.
Drink for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Take care, everybody.
Good
Bye-bye.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Be all
you.
soon.